Welcome to Happy Talks with Dr. Alice and Donovan. Dr. Alice Fong is a holistic naturopathic doctor and founder of Amour de Soi Wellness. And Donovon Jenson is a software engineer and founder of HowToHappy.com. Together, they're out to cause more happiness in the world.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Happy Talks. My name is Dr. Alice, and this is my awesome co-host, Donovan. And today we are talking about death. Yes, death. So might be considered a morbid topic, but I think it's a really important topic to discuss because it is part of life and it happens to all of us to some extent. So Donovan, what are your initial thoughts when it comes to the topic of death?
Yeah, so the first thing that comes to mind is kind of what you mentioned around people thinking it is a morbid topic or something that they don't want to talk about or think about. And I think that's a very common position or something that you see a lot of. And I know I've definitely been in that boat before as well, or there are still certain times that I am in that boat.
Mm-hmm.
But realistically, it's something that because it's so pushed off to the corners and we don't talk about it or think about it that often, that it can be really devastating when it happens, either, when it's something impending for yourself or people you love or know, or if people you love or know die at a time that's unexpected for you. It can really be sort of a very off-putting experience, something that really rocks your balance to the core. And I think if we spent some more time during the more calm or regular time sort of thinking about death and coming to terms with it, it would be a lot easier during those transition times. So those are some of the ideas that come up for me. I'd be curious what's on your end.
Yeah, no, I kind of concur with that sentiment in that, death, I believe death should be a topic that we discuss more openly and freer without this sense of taboo or dancing around it versus actually directly talking about it. And I think because it's a difficult topic, it doesn't mean we should avoid those topics. That sometimes leaning into those difficult conversations can actually produce beautiful things. An example is that I actually, when I was in medical school, there's actually this international movement called the Death Cafe that I participated in. And we actually hosted these Death Cafe events in my medical program. And we would invite the public to just come in for an evening. It's a free event where we just have cupcakes or pastries and coffee or tea. And a bunch of strangers come in. There's 30 or 40 strangers, and we come in and we get into small groups and discuss death, which sounds weird, I think, probably from an observer point of view. But when I experienced it, it was actually one of the most beautiful things in that it was so intimate of a conversation. It's a conversation that we don't normally have. It created an instant connection because we were able to be vulnerable and talk about our fears around death, people we've lost, just death in the healthcare industry, just anything. It was kind of open-ended and just automatically created a sense of deeper, authentic connection among strangers, which was the beautiful thing. So within 30 minutes, I was just feeling more connected to people that I had never met before. And that's what I discovered in doing that. And eventually I ended up hosting some death cafes when I had my own office space in Maryland. But this is a thing where you could I think it's a nonprofit because they don't make any profits. Just if someone chooses to host a death cafe, there's some guidelines and standards on how to do it. And then you just get a group of people together and talk about it. So yeah, there's so many avenues to go with that.
Yeah, it sounds like a really interesting sort of way to get insights from other people. I'd be curious if it was just completely open-ended, or there's some prompts or some more narrowing in, because there's all sorts of different sub things I guess you could cover under death. I would just be curious if it was how it was structured.
Yeah, it was. We would kind of break out into, when it's a larger group. When I hosted it within my own office space and I invited the public, it was really maybe a dozen people. So we just maybe stayed in one big circle. But when it was like a group of like 30 to 40, we would break out into like smaller groups of like 4 to 6 people, and then like switch groups. And then once in a while we would like get together as like the whole of the 30 people and discuss it. And it was kind of like group directed and open-ended, so the space to talk about anything in particular. But then sometimes, one person would talk about something and would spark a topic for like the whole expansive group versus just like the smaller group, if it seemed to like spark some interest in that sense. But I like the fact that it was more organic and group led versus like, today we're talking about death in, nursing homes versus like dying at home kind of a thing. Like, yeah, there could, but I think when you give people like the space to just naturally express whatever it is that comes to their mind, interesting things happen.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So as I'm sort of thinking about it and talking to you about it, I see sort of two at least major camps of like thought or things for us to sort of discuss today and unpack a little bit more. And you can tell me if you see some more, but one sort of theme or area I think of is like the idea of grappling with death personally, right? The idea that all of us are going to die at some point.
Right.
And then another big theme I think is sort of this idea of the people around us dying, and maybe that's subdivided into if you kind of know it's going to happen or if it's an unexpected event. So I would just be curious if there's anything else you want to add, and if not, which one of those you would like to explore first, because I think we could have a pretty good discussion in all of those realms.
Yeah, I think those are two definitely important points that we need to cover. Like, when I think about that, I'm like, wow, I don't actually fear my own death, but maybe I should. There's like this judgment in my head, but I'm like, oh man, if I lost someone that I love, that kind of compels me a little more. But I also want to cover another like facet of just whether it's like fear of our own death or the death of our loved ones, just the discomfort about death in general, and that like that it happens to all of us, and like not even wanting to broach the subject regarding us or loved ones or even just like strangers. Yeah, so
well, then let's start there. Let's start with sort of at a high level, right? This like general idea.
Yeah, sure. Well, one of the reasons why I felt propelled for this topic for this week was the recent deaths of two love celebrities that obviously I didn't personally know, but they basically like grew up in my home on my TV, which is Betty White with the Golden Girls. I watched a lot of that, and I love her. She's just clearly a very sweet, kind-hearted, loving person. And then the other one most recently was Bob Saget, which I grew up on Full House. And so he was like America's TV dad that we all loved, who had like great hearty lessons at the end of episodes that just made us feel like warm inside. And so to hear about that, those deaths in particular have made me particularly saddened to have lost such beautiful, amazing people, even though I didn't even know them. It's just like a loss for society in a way, in that, like, even though we didn't know them, we knew them in our home, and because they were on our TV like once a week or so for my childhood and growing up. So that's like a starting point of what propelled me to kind of choose this topic for the week.
Yeah, so I guess to dig into that a little bit more, like for some of those instances, right, where we're talking about like celebrities, people we didn't know, or I guess maybe if you think about like someone's pet, or if you like hear about someone else's a person that they've lost or something else, where it's like sort of this, it is grief, but in a different, disconnected, like not, I don't quite have the correct words to place onto what the feeling is. I'm sure there is some sort of description out there that fits, but it's like sort of this, maybe it's like, it's a sense of loss without fully experiencing, that the grief that comes with the sense of loss of someone close to you or something close to you. Cause I guess, a lot of people have had experiences of losing pets that are very strong.
Yeah.
I'd be curious what you think is a good way for people to start sort of unpacking some of these feelings, right? Because I think for stuff like this, for the more distant ones, right, like celebrities or people who knew other people, it's pretty easy to sort of have a moment or moments of recognition of that feeling without really like digging into it too deeply. But when something comes a little closer to home, I
Mhm.
feel like those feelings are a lot stronger and maybe harder to unpack. And the
Oh,
reason I'm directing it towards you is because in my experience, I haven't been super able to grapple with those, right? I've had a few of those instances, and I sort of did like I'm just not going to think about this, and
mhm.
then see if it just dissolves. And eventually, for me, that kind of has. I don't necessarily think that's a wise or useful way to do some of this. So I'd be curious what you got in your brain.
Yeah. And I can speak to both like the like distant loss of, celebrity that I actually didn't know personally versus like someone I've actually lost personally. And it is a very different experience, but there's emotions with all of it. As far as like what I have been doing to, and maybe that's is what a lot of people have been doing when it comes to a celebrity. It's like, oh, well, let me go watch some of their old material just because I want to reminisce in their comedy or their joy that they brought to people and their laughs. And so kind of like in the reminiscing phase, which probably wouldn't have been propelled if they were still alive, essentially. I probably wouldn't be compelled to watch that stuff because I was getting caught up in my own life. The other thing I noticed that I do, and this is something when I found out about Bob Saget, and then I went to go tell my husband about it, and he was very saddened by it. But I think we mutually kind of thought, well, this in a way compels us to really appreciate what it is that we have, the life that we have. So you never know when it could end. Bob Saget died at 65, which is relatively young. And it kind of gave us a reminder that, yeah, we need to make sure that we tell people that we love them, that we hug them when we get the chance, kind of like appreciate life a little bit more when someone like that is lost versus when it's someone that is closer to me, like the other kind of transitioning into the other avenue of losing someone that you've lost personally. I don't remember if I've actually mentioned this on this podcast before, but a few years ago, I lost a friend to suicide, and that that like still chokes me up to this day. And I remember going through like when I got the call, like yeah, I tear up even just like thinking about it now. Like when I remember getting the call, my friend called me. I was coming out of class and she called me, and I was like, it's weird for her to call me at like past 10 p.m. I'm like, why is she calling me? So I answer it, and she tells me what's happening as I'm driving home. And I just remember going through like a roller coaster of emotions, like all the emotions within a 15 span, like anger, sadness, like denial, like, no, this couldn't be happening, like guilt. I'm like, oh man, maybe if I said something, it would have made the difference. Like all of these emotions. And I was just like so raw that even like someone who has done a lot of personal development work and emotional processing on a personal level, like I couldn't even be with it so much that I was like, I think I need some vodka to be able to like it's too much right now. That night I did have to drink a little bit, not that I like continue to drink throughout the week or anything, but just for that night particularly, I was like, yeah, this is how I need to deal with it, and I just need to like cry. I told my partner when I got home, and he was trying to comfort me, and he was trying to like soothe me and give me words of encouragement, and I was like, no. Like I was like, no, you cannot. I need you to not say anything right now. You can just hold me and be quiet. That's what I need. So as far as like, you know, for me, what I feel like when it comes to someone that you've lost, that's someone close to you that you care about, I don't necessarily know if there's a wrong or right way to grieve, but I think it's healthy to just allow the emotions to come just as they are and just allow them to be, not feel bad that, you know, I went through those emotions. It was part of that process and allowed me to move through it versus trying to like suppress it and be like, I'm just going to put it to the side. I did have to do that a little bit to go to work the next day, which is hard. But it was like I gave myself space to feel what I was feeling through that experience. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think you shared a lot of useful stuff, and also thank you for sharing that personal story, because I know people appreciate it when they're able to hear these things, and it helps drive home a lot of the stuff that we're talking about. But at a less emotional, more technical level, the themes, the pieces that I was hearing that I think could be really useful to people, and now that you've mentioned it, I've seen it be useful to people, is one, when it is those big major sort of events that are really close to you, just giving yourself the space and permission, like you were saying, to grieve in whatever way you need to. Because I think a lot of people try their best to like bottle it up or hide it or get rid of it, or like push through and keep getting regular stuff done while their head is sort of exploding and their emotions are sort of exploding. Right. So I think that's one really useful piece. And from my own experience, probably the most poignant one for me was like when my grandpa died, and you know, it was like sort of expected and sort of coming, but there was I don't know how long that I just like sat in the car like screaming swear words, and at the time it felt like very, you know, because I hadn't really done any work around this, I hadn't really thought about it, I hadn't done anything. So like after that event, I was sort of like, I don't know if that's like a reasonable reaction, or like I don't know if that's what I was supposed to be doing. But now looking back, it's like that's what I needed to do in the moment to process it. In the same way you were talking about like having some drinks, like I think anything that allows you to grieve or vent out those emotions that's not, you know, potentially seriously harmful. You know, if you drank like 6 full bottles, like then that would have been, you know, like that's probably a little bit worrying. But like for the most part, anything that's not dangerous to you or others that allows you to vent out that grief definitely makes sense to like give yourself space and permission for that, even if it's outside or way outside the bounds of what you would normally do. And I think that's what felt weird for me, is like I don't have emotional outbursts like that very often. So to have an extended one, I was like, I don't know if I like this, but again, looking back, totally appropriate and fine. And then the other pieces that I heard from you were in the times that are a little bit less intense, right? Or for events that are less intense, a combination of sort of celebrating the person, or if it's like a pet or something, celebrating their life and what they produced, or your memories together, or however sort of celebrating them looks. And then another piece of sort of appreciating either, you know, what you currently have, or again, sort of the same things like the memories you have with them, or things they created, or whatever else. And I think that actually makes like a really nice set of tools to help ease the process. But I really want to like double down on the fact that anytime you experience something like this is going to be hard, and there's never going to be a point where it's just like, oh cool, well I have the tools and this terrible thing happened that I don't like, and now it's like, you know, an hour later and I'm good to go. You know, it's not about as we talk about with like a lot of emotional stuff, it's not about eliminating it or blocking it out completely, but it's about just finding the tools to I guess I would say like optimize or make the most out of whatever the situation is. You know, like on the flip side, something I've seen that is not helpful for people is like clinging to something that's no longer there, right? Whether this be someone close or one of these like further away sort of things, but just like clinging to this idea of like, oh, well, this isn't real, or like that didn't happen, or whatever else. And obviously that's a fairly normal reaction in the first few hours or whatever else.
Mhm.
But to like really hold on to that is not helpful.
Mhm.
And that's just to highlight sort of like, here's some tools that I think are helpful or ways of approaching things, and here's some that are probably not. Anyway, I've been rambling for a long time, but I really appreciated the way that you put that together, because I feel like there was a lot really nestled into this story that you shared, along with just some of the other things you were talking about.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think you bring up a great point in that it's like, I feel like even though I felt like I've processed it, I've moved on, but when I discuss it, I still get emotional, which I'm okay with. But I am curious what your thoughts are of like, you know, to deal with my emotions, however big, or go through it for, if it's a few weeks, few months, but what if it does, like, what if that grief is still so intense after like years? And I'm like, I don't, and it really is stopping you from being able to move forward with your life because you're kind of stuck on the loss and the grief. um I'd be curious of your thoughts, because that's like a different type of scenario where I was able to move through it and eventually like get back to my day-to-day life and not think about it that much and not let it hold me back in life. um Even though even when I think about it now, it still like gets me, but it doesn't disrupt my life in a way. So what are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, so I'm going to preface this by saying grief is definitely not my strong suit, but
Yeah.
I'm going to
Well,
give
yeah.
some ideas, but you know, probably not the best answer. That being said,
Mhm.
to me, it's all around sort of like these patterns or feelings, right? Like if you're feeling or seeing, or other people are seeing that you're stuck or you're doing some like destructive behavior, right? Like
Mhm.
if you suddenly switch to drinking heavily every single night for months on
True.
end,
Yeah.
then that pattern is developing, and that's not going to work. So
Mhm.
obviously it's easier said than done, right? And also a lot of
Right.
times it's easier to see as an external observer instead of the person who doesn't feel good and is using um, coping mechanisms that aren't going to work in the long term.
Right.
But my best uh, piece of advice, I guess, is that if you catch those patterns developing, starting to look at other resources, right? So, like,
Mhm.
if you caught yourself drinking the one time because you had an especially hard day, and
Right.
maybe it was more than you would typically drink or want to drink or is healthy or whatever else,
Yeah.
that seems fine to me. But as soon as you notice that that's happening, for like 3 weeks straight or something, that's
Mhm.
when I would say, okay, like maybe you need to start looking for like a therapist, right? That's like one of the main things that
Yeah.
they help people deal with.
Mhm.
um or like reaching out to family and friends, or if you can, sort of thinking of other um avenues for sort of letting out some of that emotion or feeling better, like maybe in the moment when it's rushed, like that initial time, drinking is the first thing that comes to mind, but like 3 weeks down the road,
Mhm.
hopefully the emotional intensity has subsided a little bit to the point where at least you can say like, okay, I need to vent out more of this. I can't
Yeah.
just keep on drinking like this. Maybe
Right.
you can do some writing or exercise or whatever. There's tons of different tools for venting things out. So the one huge golden star or asterisk, I guess, next to that is obviously it's so much easier for me to sit here and say, like, hey, just think about all these other things and approach it differently and get these extra resources. So a lot of it is just recognizing that pattern, or at least listening to the people around you if they start to notice that you're falling into sort of a pattern like that.
Mhm.
But again, grief is not my strong suit. That's just a couple ideas off the top of my head.
Yeah. No, I think that that's perfect, and I would resonate with what you say and concur with a lot of that. And that, you know, drinking, yeah, short term, in that most intense period of like the initial shock of it all. But if it did become an ongoing thing where it's just sort of like I need to drink every night heavily to like numb myself from the pain, that is something to be concerned about, and to realize that, to recognize that I would need like additional support. And I think this is like the key that I want to emphasize, is that yeah, there's resources there and you can choose to access them or not. And you can, it's you have to use your own judgment to assess when that time is right for you, but to realize that, you know, there's support there for you, whether it's friends or family or therapists or books or courses or whatever grief groups, whatever that might be. There's support out there, and it's a matter of utilizing that and realizing that you don't have to do it alone. That, you know, there have been people that have lost loved ones and can connect with you. And I get that it's not easy to open up, and maybe you don't want to be kind of like the party pooper kind of a thing. But, you know, I think one of the hardest things for some people is to like accept that support. And it doesn't mean you have to like accept it right away. Maybe you do need a little space to be out with yourself and with your feelings, but realize that the support's there and choosing to accept that at some point to help you through it if you are still struggling with it on your own, I think is important.
Yeah, I think that's a really important thing to think about. And to sort of add on to that, another piece, these short-term coping strategies will never help you resolve the underlying feeling. You
Right.
know,
Exactly.
if you're drinking heavily or overeating or whatever it is that you're using to feel
Yeah.
good, it's those short-term strategies. If the underlying grief is not resolved, then you're going to continue doing that forever. And that's
Right.
not sustainable, right? Those strategies make you feel good in the short term, but have serious costs in the long term. So not only are you going to be continuing to deal with whatever you have been dealing with, but eventually those strategies are going to catch up with other negative things to compound that. So that's another piece of it, is it's just, you know, if you want to move past it, if you don't want to feel like that forever, you cannot use those short-term strategies because they will never solve the problem.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. You got to go deeper. And yeah, that's where, you know, having some ideally, you know, professional guidance will help you explore that deeper. But, you know, having community and friends and family is important too. But anyways, kind of shifting gears, because the area that we haven't quite covered yet is the fear of our own demise in a way, or in that sense. And I feel fortunate in that it's not generally a thought I think about or worry about in that sense. And I'm thankful, like my partner has a little bit of a fear of flying, and we just flew recently for the holidays. And it's like when there's turbulence, he's like a little on edge, and I'm like, whatever, like kind of a thing. It's like, yeah, it happens. So I don't know. Do you have like experience of fears of your own kind of death or ending?
Yeah, so I have quite a bit of history with it, and we'll have to unpack a couple other pieces and might open up some interesting conversation. But for me, the fear of death has kind of circled around this idea of purpose and meaning in life, right?
Mhm.
So there have been times in the past where I would think like, well, I don't want to die because I want to create something of meaning or like leave a legacy or some value, but then I would have to backtrack on that a little because I'd be like, well, what's the point? Because eventually everyone's going to die. So even the stuff that I made is going to be gone. So what is the purpose of that? And
Mhm.
so to me, it was kind of wrapped up in this larger existential dread around meaning.
Mhm.
And basically the idea of like, if I die, I'm definitely not going to be able to figure out this meaning piece.
Mhm.
And then as I sort of evolved through that, or was able to find sort of ways to answer that question, or basically figure out like, okay, there's meaning in just existing and sort of trying to make the most of my existence and help other people and whatever else. We don't need to go into my values. But
Mhm.
as I sort of got that meaning piece pinned down, the fear of death piece disappeared a little bit. But then there was still this idea of like, well, the only thing I've ever known is existing, so I'm scared to not exist. Like I don't know what that experience is.
Yeah.
um and so I have done some work specifically around like there's a lot of stoic philosophers who talk about death in interesting ways, and some of those ideas have helped quell that fear a little bit. I don't think it's something that I've totally come to terms with.
Mm.
But you know, there are statements in some of the writings like there's all this time before you were born that you didn't exist. Why are
Right.
you worried about all the time for after you're dead that you won't exist?
Hmm.
And there's a bunch of little things like that like have chipped away at it a little. But I'm sure if I sit and really think about dying long enough, I can get some anxiety. I can produce some and make myself feel a little worried.
Uh-huh.
But that's sort of been my journey around that idea so far.
Hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. I do kind of wonder though, because me and my husband are in the process of like family planning and we want to have kids. And I'm like, man, when we have kids though, is that anxiety going to come up? Because I'm like, if I die, I don't want to leave my kids without, their mother. That would be sad. What if they're young children? What if they're older? That would suck. But as of now, it's not quite a fear for me, but I can understand why not existing. I think I like that you connected it with like legacy, or not legacy, purpose and meaning. Although legacy, I think, is another thing that I think people want to leave behind when they leave this world. I think it's important that, that you're remembered, that you made a difference or an impact in people's lives to some degree. Yeah. So those are my initial thoughts on that.
Yeah. So one question that I have is like, so if you think about, like, I don't know, a plane crashing into your house right now, and not,
Like,
and,
maybe it
and
just
not,
seems so far-fetched. It just doesn't seem possible. I know it's possible, but it's like, I made it this far. I doubt it's gonna happen.
So do you think maybe that's what it is that it hasn't like
Hmm.
materialized for you personally in a way that feels strong enough, or you just like it just isn't in your DNA to be worried about it?
I don't know. Or maybe I just
Huh.
haven't had enough like near death experiences to really be scared of it. Um, I honestly feel like more scared of, losing my mother or my father, or just like losing people that I care about that are meaningful to me than my own demise. Maybe it's just like, I don't know if it's like a self-protection mechanism where I just don't think about it. And so I don't, or if it's just like something I don't really think about for me myself personally. So I guess it's a blessing in a way, who knows. But I am curious though, the other thing that I did want to touch on for this episode in regards to death is like, what would you like, because I want to get this on like record in case we do get hit by a bus tomorrow. Let's get it on record. What would you like to happen to you when your time comes, whenever that is?
So when you say like to die or after I'm already dead?
um Maybe both. Well, like I'll just share where I'm at. Like ideally, I would like to die at home, because I know a lot of people in these days end up like in the hospital, and like they prolong the process and it's dragged out and it's expensive, all that, Ideally, I'd like to die like Betty White did, just like at home, like peacefully in my sleep, like nice and easy, like yeah. But I guess I do have maybe like the fear or concern that what if I have some sort of, at the end of my life, many, many years from now, what if I have like a bad disease and I'm hospitalized or in a nursing home, and it's going to cost my, my children, or I have the money to like pay for the ridiculous hospital bills that would keep cost to like expand my life for a little bit longer, even though I don't really need that necessarily. So that's the concern. That's how I'd like to die. But then what I want happen to me when I die is I am an organ donor, although I guess if I'm really old, I don't know if they want to use my organs at that point, but I do want to, like, if I'm really old when I die, I'd like to, if my organs are not usable because they're so old, um, I would like to donate my body to be like a cadaver for medical students, because I learned a lot from my cadaver lab when I was in medical school. in that sense. So, get some practical use for some give back to students in the way that people who had donated their bodies for me to learn and become a better doctor would be my choice. But then after that, I'd like to be cremated. And then I don't want a burial site. I want to be planted. I want a tree planted, because I feel like that's life-giving versus like, there's something about a like tombstone that's just like being in a coffin just seems like a waste, versus like a tree is life-giving, giving oxygen to the world. So for the record, that's how I'd like to go.
All right. I think I understand the question now.
Yeah.
Yeah. So for me, sort of the main question around dying is sort of quality of life, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't want my life to be prolonged if it's just miserable, right? Like you're saying, like, I don't want to be in a hospital for an extra year if every single day is miserable and I can't think straight or think at all, or like I'm not even conscious, or I'm just completely incoherent. Like none of those are really life, right? That extra year of life is the equivalent of just being dead at the same time, because I'm not like getting new experiences or like spending quality time with people or anything like that. So that's in the ideal situation. Obviously I would like to probably just go out peacefully, very old, and like no pain.
That'd be nice. Yeah.
there is a joke that I've been saying for a long time, that's like, when I'm that old and about to die anyway, that's when I want to do like huge amounts of all the drugs I've never done, right? Because like the fear is like, oh, it's going to ruin your body and your mind. But if my body and my mind are already shot, like, just fill me up with all kinds of drugs. So I don't know, that could be one option. And then after, go ahead.
Oh, that's funny, because actually I just remembered another thing that I thought of about my death. It's not all the drugs, although I'd consider that, because why not if you're about to die? But I had thought of like, because I don't have any tattoos now, but I've always like, because I don't like the permanence of like a lifetime commitment, but I'm like, I'm going to get super tatted up, like really be a little saggy of a skin, but I'm like, it'll be really funny because I'm going to like donate my body to medical schools to be dissected. I want to be like funny tattoos that be like, cut here, like, guess what's under here? Like ridiculousness. That was something I considered. Just tons of tattoos. Yeah.
It'd be helpful for the students.
I know, right?
Extra guidance.
Exactly. Yeah. But go ahead, continue on.
Well, I actually don't have a whole lot to add, because after I'm dead, I don't have any beliefs that tie in with that, so I don't really care what happens. I guess for the sake of my family, I should probably actually think about it, just so that they don't have to fight about what to do. I'd rather not be buried, just because it seems like a waste of resources. Kind of like you were saying, like, you don't need to dig a hole and section out a piece of a spot for me.
Right.
I don't exist, so it doesn't matter. But I haven't really thought about that piece too much, just because I just don't hold any strong beliefs about what should be done.
So would you want to be like cremated? Would you want your ashes spread somewhere in particular, or do you care? No.
If someone in my family thinks that'd be a fun activity to do, then sure, but like, I don't care.
Okay. There's no like special spot you'd like to be thrown in ash wise. Like
maybe I should maybe that should be my
park.
goal, is to find a place that's special enough that I care enough that's for that to happen. But as of right now, no, it doesn't. It's not important to me.
Okay. Well, that now your family will know if you should pass, they can watch this video.
Yeah.
Know that you didn't really care, so they don't have to fight about it.
They don't have to do anything. Just leave me wherever I am. It's fine.
Yeah. All right. Well, was there anything else around the topic of death that you wanted to cover before we wrap up?
I don't think so. I think we covered, quite a few different angles and pieces of it.
Yeah, I agree. Well, I guess that'll be it for this episode. I appreciate all of you viewers and listeners for tuning in today. If you would like to share how you'd like to die, a little morbid, or what you'd like to happen to you after you should pass, you can leave a comment in the comments section below, or just some ideas or thoughts about death if you have them, if you'd like to share. Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like it and then go and subscribe to my channel and ring the bell so you get notified when the next video comes out. If you check out in the description below, go to my website where you can get my free fast and easy guide to stress relief. Thanks again for checking us out, and we'll see you next time.